We tend to turn a blind eye to conspirators and their outlandish theories. But beneath the surface, we may find some assumptions that completely shatter the facade when they're proven to be true. Number 10. This conspiracy theory involves two entities that are well known to society. One of these is known as the nation's first line of defense, the Central Intelligence Agency. The CIA has found itself at the center of various theories such as MKUltra, human experiments, and shadow governing. We then turn to an unexpected aspect involved in this conspiracy, the second entity, the 14th Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama is a Tibetan Buddhist monk, Tenzin Gyatso, the first to become a global figure. He's known for his advocacy of his religion and the rights of the Tibetan people. So what exactly is he doing in a conspiracy about the CIA? Well, at some point, the Dalai Lama was accused by conspiracy theorists of being a CIA agent. According to the 1998 United States declassified intelligence documents, this conspiracy is actually entirely true. The Dalai Lama ended up with an annual subsidy of $180,000. The Buddhist's role in the intelligence agency began sometime in the 1960s. Jim Mann authored a summary of these documents underneath the title CIA Gave Aid to Tibetan Exiles in the 60s, files show. It turned out that the agency was providing the Tibetan exile movement with a large sum of $1.7 million each year, in an effort to fund operations that would directly disrupt and hamper China and its infrastructure. This $1.7 million also included the Dalai Lama's aforementioned salary. The funding, according to former classified documents, was part of the agency's efforts to undermine the communist governments at the height of the Cold War. They focused mainly on the Soviet Union and China. The United States Government Committee not only approved the Tibetan operations, but also authorized the Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba that took place in April of 1961. The documentation provides an insight into the decade-long covert program in which the agency supported the Tibetan movement. During this time, the CIA was trying to figure out a way to weaken Mao Zedong's hold on China. The Tibetan exiles were looking for assistance in keeping their movement going after the Dalai Lama and his supporters fled the area in 1959 to revolt against Chinese rule. This event placed the CIA and the movement in a position that would end up bringing them together. According to the Dalai Lama, former intelligence officials, and independent scholars, the support for the Tibetans ended in the 1970s. In total, the agency had set a budget of $1.735 million for this operation. The expenses remained at this level for 4 more years, until budget cuts placed their available funds at $1.2 million a year. The Dalai Lama wrote in his autobiography that the CIA had trained and equipped the Tibetan guerrillas, who would carry out raids from their base camp in Nepal. It was in this same book that he also detailed that 2 of his brothers had made contact with the agency for help in 1951, supposedly unbeknownst to the leader. The CIA at this point agreed to help them, not for Tibetan independence though, but rather an effort to destabilize the communist governments. These efforts, though, only worsened Tibet's situation. The documents confirmed that the Buddhist leader was being paid an annual salary for this effort in connection with the Tibetan operation. Despite this official declaration, though, he maintains that he was unaware of his brother's arrangements in political action, propaganda, and intelligence operations. The Dalai Lama's personal representative also stated that he had no knowledge of the $180,000 annual subsidy. He also had no knowledge of how this money was spent. It was found that the leader's role in the operation may have been to encourage the Tibetan resistance. The official report also stated that the Dalai Lama received a letter from the United States Defense Department, and this letter described light weapons and financial aid to the separatist movement. Despite his claims of not knowing about the operations when they were being carried out, more documents clarified the leader's position in it all. Based on the report and his autobiography, it appears that he was aware of paramilitary training that the Tibetans were being given, which was linked to violent acts. According to one article, the report had called the Dalai Lama a chess piece for the side of the CIA during the Cold War. With the declassification came a shadow of truth that fell over the Divine King. His connection to the CIA, according to the public, did not fit in with the moral authority he had exhibited until that point. It turned out that the conspirators were right. The Dalai Lama did work for the CIA and remains reluctant to reveal the extent of his involvement and knowledge of the operation. Number 9. This is an old conspiracy theory that's been around for quite a few years, and again, it involves the United States government. The theory of mind control has been attributed to the CIA and US governments ever since its conception. This conspiracy posits that these entities are controlling our minds by making us think things that we wouldn't naturally be thinking about. This is similar to the MKUltra conspiracy, which has also been proven to be true. While the truth in this aspect may be a bit different from what theorists have suggested, they aren't that far off. It turns out that the government actually did start to develop a type of weapon that could discreetly direct a message to a person through a frequency, hence the term message beaming, or beaming messages. Obtained through the Freedom of Information Act, a report was released titled Bioeffect of Selected Non-Lethal Weapons. The report declassified information on a Pentagon report about microwaves that would target the human mind and whisper messages to them. This means of mind control presented itself as a mimicry of schizophrenia. No one else around the target would be able to hear this beamed message. Only the target themselves would be able to distinguish the very audible voice among the projected frequency. This voice would tell the target anything from a secret to an instruction to a threat. Articles released in 2019 confirmed that the Pentagon revealed that they were testing some talking lasers. According to the documents, weapons researchers at the Department of Defense have been in the process of developing less fatal weapons for warfare. This included the non-lethal laser that could send brief messages across short distances, and even through glass. Apparently, this sci-fi type device is being developed by the Joint Non-Lethal Weapons Directorate, a military initiative. The scientists and researchers involved are making use of a physics phenomenon known as laser-induced plasma formation. A powerful laser is used to form a ball of plasma, while a second laser oscillates it, creating sound waves. If done correctly, the laser burst can mimic the human language. According to the chief scientist of the effort, Dave Law, this kind of technology may be brought to the table very soon. A video demonstrating the laser's talking abilities circulated on the internet, where the weapon can be heard saying, "Stop, or we'll be forced to fire upon you." The creation of this non-lethal weapon had sounded the alarms of many who've come to learn about it. The purpose of this development is to target potential intruders. Users of the weapon, such as military personnel, would be able to instruct intruders and avoid an otherwise violent response. While it's able to pass through glass, the talking laser hasn't been able to penetrate other barriers. If it does gain some traction and an adequate power source, this non-lethal weapon may see a future of being mounted on a small vehicle for crowd control. But it seems that this isn't even the first or only talking, suggestive weapon in development. Researchers at MIT are said to be developing a laser for public use, which uses water molecules in the air. The vibrations of these molecules produce a sound that allows a message to be sent into a target's ear. The message would be imperceptible to anyone else in the area. Time and time again, we've heard conspiracies relating to mind control popping up, and most of the time we find that they're true. Suggestibility and mind control carried out by the government was an effort of the past, or so we all thought. Number 8. Another conspiracy theory that the government often finds itself at the center of is the experiment testing that they're accused of conducting on the human population. One of the most infamous examples is the horrors that took place in Unit 731. There are a few accusations that have been made in the past about the CIA experimenting on people, some of which have already been proven to be true. One such case has been named Operation Sea Spray. Operation Sea Spray was one of the apparent hundreds of bioweapon simulations that were carried out during the 1950s and 1960s. The US military focused on a particular bacterium known as Serratia marcescens, which is known to live in both water and soil, and it's known for its ability to produce a red pigment. The bright color ability makes this microbe useful in experiments, since it's easy to see. On the 26th of September in 1950, the crew aboard a US Navy minesweeper ship spent the next 6 days spraying this bacterium into the air, 2 miles off the coast of Northern California in the Bay Area. The aim of this experiment was to determine the vulnerability of a big city like San Francisco to a bioweapon attack. In the days to follow, the military would be taking samples to track the bacteria and how far it spread. They sampled 43 sites and discovered not only had it infested San Francisco, but also had infiltrated surrounding suburbs. Many residents of these areas inhaled the microscopic bacterial spores. The experiment revealed that San Francisco and cities of a similar size would be susceptible to germ warfare, and the experiment was therefore deemed a success. But when the military initiated Operation Sea Spray, they were unaware of a crucial detail. They didn't know that Serratia was harmful to humans. The germ had been linked to red spots it would produce on infected food and wasn't recognized in clinical conditions. But after just 1 week, 11 of the residents checked into a nearby Stanford University hospital. All 11 of them had urinary tract infections. Doctors noticed that the pathogen they used to treat the patients for an infection displayed a red hue. They determined that the 11 patients were infected with Serratia, which was incredibly rare. Of course, at the time, no one knew about the operation that had just been carried out and authorized by the government. The university began an extensive investigation in an attempt to identify the origins of the red bug. Scientists were able to identify a microbe, and the cases became the first ever recorded outbreak of Serratia marcescens. The outbreak had also changed the region's entire microbial ecology. Despite the outcome of the experiment, Ocean Sea Spray continued as the military released more germs in other cities across the country for 2 more decades. Number 7. In the world of car racing, many great racers have emerged. One such talented individual was the Formula One champion, Nelson Piquet. His son, Nelson Piquet Jr., would later emerge as the first FIA Formula E champion. Piquet would find himself racing in the 2008 Singapore Grand Prix, from which the Crashgate conspiracy would emerge. He would be racing alongside his teammate, Fernando Alonso, and would ultimately win the race, sparking controversy. In 2005 and 2006, Fernando and Renault were world champions, but after his turbulent year at McLaren, the team was left in the midfield position. It was also suggested that Renault would be pulling the plug if the results didn't make some sort of improvement, and so the race commenced at the Singapore Grand Prix. Alonso needed to make a pit stop on the 12th lap for a tire check and to refill his fuel. Given that he was placed in the midfield, it didn't make sense for him to be given a lower fuel level from the beginning. The disadvantage, of course, caused the driver to drop back, but just 1 lap later, things began looking up for the racer. His teammate, Piquet, had crashed, and the safety car was brought out. As a result, Alonso was able to move up in the order. The remaining drivers in front of him pitted for a refuel, allowing Alonso to win the race. While it was seen by some as a stroke of luck, some of the folks in the crowd and race officials initiated a rumor stating that the crash was no accident and that it was done intentionally. It was posited that Piquet purposefully threw the race to allow his teammate to win the Singapore Grand Prix. While officials and fans ignored this conspiracy, the truth couldn't be hidden for too long. Despite claiming that the crash was a mistake, just 1 year later, Piquet revealed the scandal. The crash was, in fact, deliberate. The racer explained that Renault officials had instructed him to crash. The incident, though, was played out in a much too obvious way. It occurred at turn 17, an area that required racing drivers to slow down, making it almost impossible to crash there. It was one of the few locations on the route that was difficult to quickly clean up, and the safety car was deployed at the exact same time that every other car on the track, aside from Alonso, needed to be refueled. Adding to this scandal was the disastrous pit stop that Ferrari driver, Massa, had taken. When he was given the green light to go, he was still connected to a fuel hose, knocking over a few mechanics as he drove off. They struggled to remove the hose when the driver stopped, and he was forced to rejoin at the back of the grid, and was also given a drive-through penalty. This rumor, and subsequent truth of the matter, led to the World Motorsport Council to intervene. They investigated what happened, and Renault ultimately faced permanent suspension and disqualification. Piquet was awarded immunity, and Alonso was entirely unaware of the plan until the racer came out with the truth. A key figure in the scandal was the Renault team principal, who was banned indefinitely. Number 6. Among the alien conspiracies and UFO sightings, a rumor emerged that there were extraterrestrials buried in a desert of New Mexico, a theory possibly connected to the Roswell incident. This conspiracy was proven true as recently as 2013, but not in the way you would expect. The truth about this theory begins with Atari Games Corporation, the American producer of video games. While most of the games they released were a success, there was one in particular that was labeled as a gaming disaster. It was E.T. the Extraterrestrial, the game for the Atari 2600. It had been based on the 1982 blockbuster of the same name, but the game was nothing more than a confusing mess, leaving players incredibly frustrated with it. The E.T. character was sent to travel through a wraparound world that kept returning the players to the exact same screen over and over again. There were also pits all over the ground in which the alien's phone is hidden, which for some reason would constantly trap the player inside. After this, Atari began to run into some trouble. The owners of the company were making some pretty questionable business deals. Programmers were making terrible games. The CEO was fired, and hundreds of employees were laid off. Millions of video game cartridges were left unsold. So what was Atari to do with so many cartridges that they weren't going to sell? According to the legend, the company loaded a fleet of trucks full of millions of copies of the game that had sent them spiraling into disaster. The games were laid to rest in the ground in the middle of the New Mexico desert, just miles away from the world's first atomic blast. Rumors circulated that the extraterrestrials were buried in the desert, but it wasn't until 2013 that this conspiracy was proven true. One documentary crew who'd heard of the landfill that held the copies in the Alamogordo, New Mexico desert decided to investigate, and they ended up unearthing millions of unsold games. The story of Atari burying the games under the cover of the night was revealed by various media outlets, such as the New York Times. But gamers debated the truth of the story for years, passing it off as an urban legend. The city ended up selling 881 of the cartridges, gave 100 to the documentary crew who discovered them, and donated another 23 to museums. The remainder of the games have been left in the archive with their fates undetermined. So when conspiracy theorists said that there were extraterrestrials buried in the New Mexico desert, they weren't exactly wrong. Number 5. It's common knowledge that the Central Intelligence Agency has some influence over American politics. Theorists have accused them of shadow governing and even intentionally destabilizing political opponents through forceful means. It turned out, though, that this class of conspiracy theory was actually true, and it presented itself in the form of Operation Condor. This operation was referred to as a coordinated repression, and it's noted as the Cold War conspiracy that terrorized South America. It was officially founded in November of 1975 in Santiago, Chile, amid the closing of the first meeting of national intelligence. This effort was a secret intelligence and operations system that was established in the 70s. It was an act that allowed the South American military regimes to coordinate intelligence information. Together, they seized and assaulted political opponents, with the key members being Argentina, Chile, Paraguay, Uruguay, Bolivia, and Brazil. Ecuador and Peru later joined in. In May of 2016, for the first time in history, Operation Condor was recognized as a supranational criminal conspiracy. It was one that was organized to disappear political rivals across the borders. The effort saw coups and assassinations that sought to persecute and eliminate the social, trade union, political, and student activists. Operation Condor directly targeted any form of left-wing sympathizers in South America between 1975 and 1983. A copy of the invitation that was sent by the Chilean National Intelligence was discovered in Paraguay's Archive of Terror. That copy had been sent to General Francisco Brights, the chief of the Paraguayan National Police. The founding document detailed the context of the coordinated repressive operation through the following phases. A database was created on guerrilla movements, left-wing groups, religious groups, liberal politicians, and supposed enemies of the authoritarian regimes. Then, people who were considered to be political enemies were found and attacked. The third and final phase saw that operations were carried out to track and eliminate people located in other countries in Europe and America. The third phase of the operation was the most secretive part. It also saw the formation of teams from countries involved in it. These teams were tasked with traveling to non-member countries to carry out further assassinations. Declassified papers further revealed that various United States government agencies had early knowledge about this effort, but did nothing to stop it until the third phase had been reached. The investigations into the Operation Condor crimes started in 1999 and were initiated by two lawyers, David Bigan and Alberto Pedroncini. They'd filed a legal complaint on behalf of 5 individuals who had disappeared. Each of these missing individuals was of different nationalities and has been part of a repressive coordination. The argument was that the disappearances had been carried out in a conspiracy scandal among the highest-ranking members of the military and political leaders. The existence of the operation, its repressive, and its criminal nature prove that the CIA does in fact have more of an influence on America and American politics than we're led to believe. It appears that the theories of shadow governing and political control were based on fact. Number 4. For decades, since the conception of tobacco, many believed that the companies that sold the substance and related products were hiding something critical. While we know today that tobacco and cigarettes are the leading cause of cancer, it wasn't always like this. The concept that smoking could cause lung cancer has been around since the start of the 1950s. Despite research linking the act of smoking to cancer, it wasn't until the 1990s that that was confirmed to be carcinogenic. It was also around this time that many of the large companies and the tobacco industry as a whole were found to have conspired to hide the effects that smoking has on the body. For decades, international tobacco companies have denied and argued against any evidence that smoking could lead to serious and often fatal diseases. Internal tobacco industry documents have since been declassified and revealed the conspiracy that's come to be known as Operation Berkshire. In 1977, 7 of the leading companies in the industry conjured up a conspiracy to promote controversy over smoking and illness. For some time, advocates for tobacco control have suspected a collusion among the companies over their refusal to admit that smoking can cause many diseases like lung cancer, heart disease, and emphysema. And it seems with the declassification of these documents, the suspicions were absolutely right. The leading conspirators in Operation Berkshire were Philip Morris, R.J. Reynolds, British American Tobacco, Rothmans, and a few other companies. These documents disclosed that these entities promoted controversy and directed reassurance towards smokers through lies and cover-ups. In their efforts, the members of the Operation Berkshire discussed the feasibility of joint industry research into the supposed benefits of tobacco and smoking. They referred to a program called Smoker Reassurance, which would be an effort to counter the rise in social unacceptability of smoking. Morris was also recorded in the meeting notes to have agreed to establish 3 working parties to deal with social acceptability, benefits of smoking, and other possible causes of smoking-related ailments. Operation Berkshire wasn't the only effort that the tobacco industry deployed in an effort to disguise the health risks linked to smoking. Another project was Operation Mayfly. It involved a field test in 1981, during which tobacco institutes in Australia and New Zealand were utilized. This effort sought to influence and change public opinion for a more favorable outcome towards smokers, the industry, and smoking. The creation of this controversy and the implementation of the conspiracy greatly delayed the control measures of tobacco and smoking throughout the world. The declassified documents also found that the companies had internal studies dating back to the 50s relating to the side effects of smoking. Tobacco and cigarettes contain harmful substances including cyanide, tar, lead, and arsenic. In 1959, Big Tobacco found out that it also contains polonium-210, a radioactive isotope. While the companies could have removed it and made absorbing nicotine harder, they chose not to because it would have affected the companies and their profits. Number 3. There exist a few conspiracy theories and conspiracy operations about climate change. Some believe that it's a mere fabrication and that we aren't being told the real extent of damage that global warming has done and who's responsible for it. Only one of these 2 conspiracy theories is true, though. For more than 50 years, fossil fuel executives have known how much damage is being done and how crucial it would end up being. But just like the tobacco industry, they too deliberately concealed it, also leading to early fatalities through cynical deception. In the mid-1900s, society began to learn about the effects of CO2 emissions on the atmosphere. Various reports warned of the rise in CO2 levels and what could happen if regulations were not put in place. But large fossil fuel companies denied the effects that the emissions were having, and instead of trying to solve the issue, they lied to the public. Some theorists then presented the idea that the public was being lied to, and that climate change was worse than they thought, but of course they weren't believed. In 1968, the Stanford Research Institute warned the American Petroleum Institute about the accumulation of CO2 emissions in the atmosphere. They explained that it could reach 400 parts per million by the year 2000. This rise would ultimately melt ice caps, raise the seas, and cause worldwide environmental damage. ExxonMobil at the time was one of the largest publicly traded energy providers, and their scientists decided to do their own study on the effects that companies like theirs were having on the environment. In 1977, they reported that fossil fuels were responsible for the increase in carbon dioxide. The company was also warned against its 50-year plan and how catastrophic it would be. Many of the companies, including Exxon, knew what would happen if they didn't start to regulate their activities, but they decided to follow suit with the tobacco industry as their leading example. They embarked on an effort to trick the masses by paying fake experts to publish papers. These papers picked selective data to support a false conclusion, and even sowed their own conspiracy theories in an attempt to deflect attention from what they had done. In 2015, Inside Climate News investigated these claims and found that Exxon, along with other companies, was aware of climate change in 1977, 11 years before it became a public problem. Despite this knowledge, the industry promoted the idea of climate change as misinformation. This confirmed the idea that theorists had about being misled about the degree to which global warming would affect the planet. Number 2. Over the past few decades, historical research and recently declassified documents have revealed how major industries including tobacco, fossil fuels, and even sugar have concealed the hazards that their products contain. It may be more difficult now to understand how sugar was once viewed as a healthy food since it's been linked to diabetes and dental issues. The sugar industry conspiracy was one of the largest scandals to have ever taken place. Leading sugar producers and sweet companies pushed for fatty foods to be viewed as the enemy instead. As recent as 2016, a researcher at the University of California discovered that the Sugar Research Foundation had paid off scientists, specifically a 1967 Harvard study, to downplay the effects of sugar on heart health. The study pointed the finger at saturated fats as the leading cause of heart disease. Some soda companies have also been found to be paying researchers millions of dollars to minimize the link between the sugar in their beverages and obesity. Payoffs such as these have come as recently as 2015. The Harvard study was issued in the New England Journal of Medicine. The conspiracy in question was a literature review in which many studies and experiments were examined. The conclusion suggested that fat be cut out of all American diets to combat and address coronary heart disease. Researchers were able to get their hands on documents that directly revealed that the sugar industry was trying to influence these scientific inquiries and debate. The conspiracy that the industry conjured up, though, was a success, and they were able to trick the masses. The industry and even the government began to promote the idea that cutting out fats and cholesterol would be the best way to curb the growing heart disease epidemic. And so consumers obeyed and replaced steak and sausages with rice and pasta. They replaced butter with margarine and eggs with muesli. They swapped out their full cream for low fat and even orange juice, but instead of becoming healthier, the community became sicker. One of the Harvard scientists involved in the sugar industry conspiracy was Mark Hegstead. He was paid $6,500, or the equivalent to $49,000 today, to do a review on fat, sugar, and disease. The results concluded that fats were to blame. The industry had even picked specific papers that needed to be reviewed by their funded researchers. This focus on saturated fats would go on to influence dietary guidelines for years well into the 90s. The consumption of all fats, good and bad included, began to decline. At the same time, sugar intake saw a spark, and so commenced the obesity epidemic. It was also discovered that candy makers across America had funded a study or two. One study revealed that children who eat more candy weigh far less than those who don't eat candy. There's no doubt that the candy makers were much less sneaky about their approach. More supposed evidence emerged in the 1980s, still painting fats as the enemy. The world would be forced to face the consequences due to the lies that the sugar industry had conspired to spread. Number 1. In recent years, we've seen a growing panic spread across social media users. conspirators voiced their concerns that Facebook was sharing data with third parties, spying on us, and harvesting our personal data. Non-theorists did not heed this warning, believing it was just another one of those weird Illuminati conspiracies. That was until we came to learn about the Facebook Cambridge Analytica data scandal, in which personal data belonging to millions of Facebook users was collected. The data was collected without consent from a British consulting firm known as Cambridge Analytica. According to researchers, this data would be used for political advertising. The New York Times reported in an article that in 2014, the firm's employees managed to get their hands on the data of tens of millions of Facebook users. This became the largest known leak in the history of the social media platform. One of the contractors working with the firm was Alexander Kogan, who has his own business, Global Science Research. The collection of personal data was only reported the following year by a journalist, Harry Davies. It was found that Kogan collected direct messages sent to and from users who installed a particular application called This Is Your Digital Life, where users were paid to take a personality test. It was found that any Facebook user who installed this application unknowingly handed over their newsfeed, timeline, messages, and posts. While both Facebook and Kogan denied such claims, the Cambridge Analytica had their very own whistleblower, Christopher Wiley. Wiley revealed that he'd seen a table that Kogan produced, tabulating private messages. For users who had not installed the application that was harvesting data, only their messages with a friend who had it installed could be viewed, harvested, and shared. The whistleblower also indicated that the company, owned by billionaire Robert Mercer, would use this information to profile individual United States voters. This information would be used to directly target them with personalized political advertisements. Cambridge Analytica bragged that it obtained up to 5,000 data points for every single voter in the United States. They claimed to have applied psychographic analytics to the dataset, allowing them to determine the voter's personality so that they could micro-target advertisements and messages to directly influence their behavior. And soon, all the government surveillance, data harvesting, direct advertising, and message spying conspiracies didn't seem so far-fetched. After interviews conducted by The Guardian and The New York Times, more information was discovered about the misuse of personal data. Wiley finally disclosed the conspiracy in 2018. Despite Facebook's denial of playing a role in the scandal, they later released an apology for the data harvesting, and Mark Zuckerberg testified before Congress in 2019. The consequence that Facebook faced was a fine of $5 billion by the FTC. The platform also agreed to pay a £500,000 fine to the Information Commissioner's Office. In May of 2018, the company responsible for the data hack, Cambridge Analytica, filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. Many advertising operations have been implemented in other forms of psychographic targeting for a few years through Facebook. But the effort implemented by the firm brought the issues of psychological targeting to light. If illegal data harvesting through a specifically designed app wasn't enough, the person behind the scandal came as somewhat of a shock. In his 2016 presidential campaign, Donald Trump paid Cambridge Analytica for 3 months for data they had on American individuals, as well as their political preferences. 3 news outlets reported that the data collected was the information of at least 50 million people. The firm, though, counters this claim, stating that they only collected 30 million user profiles. Facebook later found that more than 87 million users had their information collected. This included 70.6 million in the United States, with California being the most affected. It saw 6.7 million impacted users, Texas had 5.6 million, and Florida had 4.3 million impacted users. Only 270,000 people had downloaded the This Is Your Digital Life application. Facebook now owns Instagram, Threads, and WhatsApp. A comforting thought given the scandalous conspiracy that the social media platform has been confirmed to have carried out. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.